At the beginning of this year, we've actually observed many developments taking place in Africa. And another very important element among the list of countless events that actually occurred in 2024 was the recent removal from the ECOWAS of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. Now, when looking at the outcome, which is the removal of these countries from the ECOWAS organization, it may sound or it may seem to be a pretty strong and a pretty dramatic move. Well, I do not know exactly how to qualify this situation, but what I do know is that we need, in order for us to understand the rationale of these countries, we need to look back at what happened years ago, and we need to actually start looking at the impact of political and military coups in Africa. What exactly are military coups, implicating in terms of economic development, in terms of social stability, in terms of political stability? What are the current and the future, impact of political and military coups for the African continent? Welcome to your favorite podcast, Smart, Intellectual, Knowledgeable African. I'm S.I.K.A. Before I continue discussing this very interesting episode, as you know, let me invite you, if you're not yet a member of this amazing community, to actually click on the subscribe button and to also activate the ring bell so that you don't miss out on the very interesting upcoming episode. From the introduction, I think you can actually have a sense of what I'm about to discuss today. Well, I would like to actually let you know that for the coming weeks, I am going to dedicate this podcast, to actually discuss the impact, of political and military coups for Africa. If you listen to episode 21st, which was actually the first episode of 2024, you could actually understand the strong impact of international events in terms of helping your country, accessing international money, investment money at a very interesting place. There is a strong relation or a strong correlation between your country's international image versus your country's ability to actually meet its development objective through access to cheap capital. Well, the same applies also in terms of your political stability and your military stability. You need to understand one thing. In order for your country, for any country in the world, to reach a certain level of development, maybe economic, political, or commercial, you need stability. And stability needs to be present at every level of the political life of your country. That is why it's very important to now take a look at the current situation in terms of political stability in Africa. And I hope you follow me. Like I said, I am going to be discussing this for the coming episode. The reason why I chose this episode, well, again, it's not to look at the politically correct, because I'm not here to say which leader should be in power and which one should not be in power. That's actually beyond the purpose of this episode, and that's also beyond the purpose of this podcast. What I'm trying to do is first, I want to discuss the major latest development in terms of political stability in Africa. And you will actually understand why it matters. You will notice that from 2020 up to now, only the West African region recorded over 10 coups that actually took place. And of the 10 coups, we can now register that 6 countries, have seen a change in their political, landscape. And I'm talking about Guinea-Conakry, Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Niger, and Sudan. There was also a coup that actually took place in Guinea-Bissau, but fortunately or unfortunately, this, did not succeed. So it's very important to understand what explains the surge in coups in only one region of the continent. Why not Central Africa? Why not Southern Africa? Why not North Africa? Why not simply another continent? So these are very interesting and relevant and also powerful questions that we should ask ourselves. Okay? So to give you a bit of background, let me put that again into perspective. Well, let's try and look at the number of coups, in the world. But before we look at the numbers of coups in the world, let's look at the numbers, of coups in Africa. Well, you'll notice that a child that was actually born in 2020 had seen already 2 coups in Burkina Faso. If you were a person who were born in 1955, you've already seen 70 coups in Africa. And if you are today a 70 years old individual, in total, you've seen 216 coups taking place only in Africa. Compared to the international ratio, well, overall, from 1950 up to today, it is said that the world had recorded around 487 coups taking place worldwide. And of the 487 coups taking place worldwide, the African continent is the continent with the most coups, with 216, followed by, another continent, which is Latin America, with 146 coups, and the last one is Eastern Asia with 46 coups. So the first thing that we notice here is that unfortunately, when it comes to relevant trends such as leading the international market or such as leading, international development in a specific, economic sector, it's very difficult to see the African continent taking the lead. But unfortunately, when looking at, the numbers of coups that took place from 1950 up to now, in almost a century, you can firstly see that the African continent, is the top, in the class. And this is very, very frightening. What explains the resurgence of coups in Africa? Why do we see so many coups in Africa? And this is a very important question to ask ourselves, because again, it is strongly linked with the continental stability. And like I said, you are not going to be able to reach a certain level of development if you cannot portray, if you cannot guarantee a certain set of stability. And stability is not just about social stability or economic stability. You also need to be able to provide political stability. So the first question we should ask ourselves is, what do we mean by political stability? Political stability, simply put, is the guarantee that you can actually, offer to your national market and the international market, to your local people and the international community, that the people who are going to be elected to hold public position, to hold public offices, are going to be able to do so within what is actually written, within the text, the constitution, or any other, legal documents. It's very important. Political stability also has to do with your institution strength. How strong are your institutions, especially your public institutions? And here we're talking about the parliament, we're talking about the judicial system, we're also talking about the executive system, including your government with from the prime minister to every other ministers. Like how strong are your institutions? How are you able to actually make sure that there is a strong separation between the executive power, the parliament or the legislative power, and the judicial power? How are you going to make sure that whoever is responsible can actually be held accountable in times when they are actually, culpable of any wrongdoing? So this kind of political stability are very important to actually make sure that you are in a safe environment that is first attractive to investment, attractive to opportunities, but also an investment that can clearly, set the tone in terms of accountability, in terms of transparency of public money, but also of private investment. So it's very important to understand that coups are very negative because they are depriving, the entire African continent, especially the West African region, from being able to irradiate that kind of confidence, that kind of to actually they actually prohibit, the West African region from, like portraying itself as the safest region. So now that we have a critical understanding of political stability, let's look at maybe some of the factors behind the fact or explaining such a strong resurgence, of coup in West Africa. So what is the West African region exactly? What should we understand? First, we need to understand that the West African region is home to more than 425 million people. So it means that the West African region is a very important market because implicitly you already have 425 million people that can be your potential customer when producing or delivering any kind of services or producing or making any form of goods. So that's the key reason. That's the first element to also keep in mind when thinking of West Africa. Another thing to think of about West Africa is that the region is also said to represent roughly 15% of the global population growth. So it's one of the most, thriving region in terms of demographic growth, which is also very important. Another aspect is that it is also one of the most thriving region economically speaking. West Africa GDP is actually around 3 to 4%. In 2021, for instance, it grew by 4.3% and is expected to stabilize above 4% in 2022 and in 2023. So overall, the West African region is a very dynamic region in terms of population growth, but also in terms of economic growth. And you need to understand that when seeking power, you never seek power in areas where there is no potential. So when you seek power, you always seek power in areas with the highest potential. And by potential, we're talking about like growth potential. We're also talking about economic potential. We're talking about trade potential. We're talking about also demographic potential, because you want to be responsible for an area that is actually going to make sure that you can produce wealth and you can have wealth. So in my opinion, the first element when seeing so many coups taking place in West Africa are actually partially, due to the very attractive position of this region. And what makes this region very attractive? Let's look at the countries that are actually, part of the West African region. Let's take, for instance, Guinea-Conakry. Guinea-Conakry is the second largest producer of bauxite in the world. The country is also home to diamond, to gold, and to many other natural resources. You take Côte d'Ivoire, it's the same. It's the world's largest producer of cocoa and coffee, and it's also home to very interesting natural resources. The same happened with Ghana, Nigeria, which is one of the largest producers of crude oil, in Africa and also, in the world. So when looking at the potential of these countries, you see that we are dealing with countries with a strong and high, potential when it comes to economic growth. What's lacking here is the stable environment. The second reason why West Africa is home to so many coups again is the political instability and the lack of respect of the rule of the law. You'll notice that, like I said, from 2020 to 2024, the region alone, recorded over 10 coups. And of the 10 coups, we've seen 6 coups that were actually successful. And those coups led to the overthrowing of, incumbent president. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Thank you for listening to your favorite podcast, Smart, Intellectual, Knowledgeable African, the podcast where strong realities meet with powerful perspectives. Stay tuned as I am going to continue discussing this very interesting episode. And the upcoming episode is going to be discussing the first coup that took place within the 2020 and 2024 period. I hope you're going to enjoy it. And remember, this analysis is going to help us understand the recent decision from Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali to actually leave the ECOWAS organization.